like to get it advertised on Facebook, and they won't let me advertise any or promote anything that is political. So I have to disguise things, and it's just I can't do it right now. I have to think. Okay, so here we are live. I think we are live, and I'm about to introduce you. Okay. Hi, I'm Metta Spencer. Today we're going to go to Berkeley, California, which is my sort of hometown. So I'm very eager to talk to any academic in Berkeley. And today I get to talk to a very special academic whose interests absolutely converge with mine, which is always a great thing. Don't have to argue with anybody. His name is Larry Rosenthal, Lawrence Rosenthal, and he's the director for the Institute for the Study of Right-Wing Politics, or Larry, give us a proper title.
Center for Right-Wing Studies.
Center for Right-Wing Studies. Same meaning, but different title. All right. Mm-hmm. Great to meet you. We've already got ourselves the ball rolling in our get acquainted 3 minutes before going live, and found that we have many things in common. And part of me wishes I could be in Berkeley working someplace in the Center for Right-Wing Politics.
Studies.
Good. Yeah, because that's right now what's keeping me awake at night is a horrible feeling that I no longer believe in democracy. It doesn't work anymore. Everything's broken. We've got to fix it, and I don't know what to do. And it's these right-wing guys that are the problem. So, but we don't want to start there. What I want to start with is your book, because I have here this fine book again, please help me with the title.
Empire of Resentment, Populism's Toxic Embrace of Nationalism.
It has such a good title, and I love the fact that you get resentment in there. I had a whole theory about resentment and envy and contempt, and you pretty well said it right there, the first chapter. So I've just been refreshing my memory of your book, which I haven't read it completely at all, but I've had 2 or 3 good passes through chapter 1 because I like the first chapter so much I keep rereading it. It's wonderful. Okay. So I want you to tell us about that book, which I guess you finished late in 2018 after Trump had already taken power, or?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We were well into it.
Yeah. So you'd had some experience with this man by then. And so you could actually reflect some of what we all came to realize about him later. Probably is right there in the book from the get-go. Why don't you give us a précis of your argument?
Okay. One of the major arguments of the book is to explain Trump's success and his winning the presidency in terms of an ideological shift in America's populist right. That is to say, what Trump succeeded in doing was migrating the populist base that had formed above all in the Tea Party during the Obama years. And the Tea Party stood for things like Koch brothers ideological free market extremism. That's where they were ideologically. And what Trump succeeded in doing is migrating those people from free market fundamentalism, as I call it in the book, to America First nationalism. And it was that transformation. And I talk about the fluidity of ideology on the populist right. That's a recurring theme, and I think it's significant these days as well. But that's one of the central arguments of the book in terms of how Trump managed what he managed. And he did so by understanding the nature of resentment, that what these people felt was dispossession. I talk a great deal about dispossession. I eventually distinguish between identity movements and identity politics of the left and the right. If we think of the word identity politics, although less so today, has always conjured up the left. It's conjured up Black movements, it's conjured up gay movements, women's movements, Latino movements, et cetera, et cetera. And those are movements about demanding a place at the table. We have been shut out systematically of power and you know, social prestige, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a demand for a seat at the table. Right-wing identity politics is not about that sense of deprivation, of not having something. It's about the sense of something taken away. It's not about, it's about dispossession. And so an identity politics based on dispossession is far more acid and severe than one based on deprivation. And that's what we got in the American right. And it has become, you know, presumably we'll get to this to some extent, that's become far more severe over time, especially in the post-2020 election. The sense of dispossession has just risen into a new realm on the populist right. I also talk in the book about the international dimension of what Trump was about. I call it the nationalist international in the book, and that he was part of a zeitgeist, and that zeitgeist had a number of things in common. Just to take one, which kind of goes to the center of things like, and this is something I treat in the book, you know, it was within the time frame of the book, was Charlottesville, which was more or less a rehearsal or a preview of January 6th. And there were 3 chants at Charlottesville in the Tiki Torch marches before the night before it became violent. And those were "Blood and Soil" and "Jews Will Not Replace Us," which are kind of, you know, almost nostalgia for Nazism. But the third one was simply "You Will Not Replace Us." And that goes to the very heart. If there was one thing to understand about the resentment on the right in America, and it's more and more clear as time goes on, especially now, post-2020 election, is this sense of you will not replace us. Replacement theory comes from France. It's an import. The Le Grand Remplacement. French right has been talking about that since at least the 1970s. You could even go back to the 1960s and Enoch Powell in Britain. But there is this sense in Europe of, or in France, let's say, but throughout Europe of refugees and immigrants from the Middle East and Africa replacing the proper French population, and this can get quite extreme. There are people who call it cultural or even white genocide. It's not an unheard of phrase. And that is what these people were um, chanting the night before in Charlottesville. And it's this sense that in the USA, it was about Trump's campaign, and the first years of his presidency were about replacement by Latinos, by people coming over the border. That has changed. That changed in 2020. Can I elide from the
Yeah,
book
whatever.
today?
Yeah.
That people have asked me since I started the Center for Right-Wing Studies at the University of California in March of 2009. In January of 2009, Barack Obama was elected president, was inaugurated as president. In February of 2009, the Tea Party began. We opened our door in March of 2009, which is to say the center has spanned the Tea Party and then the evolution into Trumpism. People compliment me on my timing, but that's another matter. Oh, it's like you bought Microsoft at 1 or something like that. The point there is that the things have moved on in a way that is both continuous and more extreme over this time. And one thing that happened in 2020, which I think is really significant, and I've begun talking about and writing about, is that the enemy changed, the other changed. The other in 2016, think about the Trump's campaign in 2016. It was the Latinos are coming. They're coming across the border. They're rapists. They're murderers. And then even the most august occasions in his presidency, things like the State of the Union, he would put these parents have had their children murdered by MS-13, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That changed. If you think about, that was the master narrative, let us say, of the 2016 Trump campaign. What was the master narrative of the 2020 campaign? It was Black Lives Matter and Antifa are coming to get your daughters this time. The immigrants were gone. That's really extraordinary.
I had never thought about it.
It's an extraordinary fact.
While you were leading up to asking the question, I was trying to think of the answer, and I couldn't think of the answer. So yeah, it makes sense. But then there was the Black Lives. Okay, now when did it was a year ago that
this takes place, this transformation takes place in 2020. And it takes place via 3 movements. The first is the anti-lockdown movement, which which mobilized the things like right-wing militias into the streets to oppose mask wearing and lockdown, and you got Trump tweeting in caps, "Liberate Michigan," which was taken over by the Michigan state legislature was taken over by armed men, and I emphasize men, and shut down the work of the legislature. He also posted "Liberate Virginia and made a point of talking about gun rights in that one. So that's the first of these movements. To step back for a second, Charlottesville fizzled. Charlottesville was an attempt to create it was called Unite the Right, the Unite the Right rally, August 2017. The aim of that was to produce a united right militia. And it didn't succeed. And that kind of militia right went quiet for a couple of years, but 2020 woke them up. And the anti-lockdown is the first of 3 movements which wakes them up. The second is we are going to defend businesses in the streets against Black Lives Matter and Antifa. So it's a response to the George Floyd demonstrations. And it's not simply that the right-wing militia types organize. It's that there is a continuity across the spectrum of the right where these things motivate all the way through the militia right into the populist right, and as we have seen, into the the proper Republican right, who have been supportive of these things. The third movement in 2020 is the Trump campaign itself. And Trump establishes himself famously in the first debate with Joe Biden, where he is kind of all over the place. And among the things he says is he answers Chris Wallace famously saying to the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. Immediately you get on Telegram, one of these social media sites that the Republican or that the militia right is on. Yes, sir. They say, yes, sir, as though he were. I did publish a thing then saying that Trump had added to his role as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, now commandante-in-chief of the right-wing militias. And he had established himself as this. And all of those currents, the first current, in terms of the militia, the anti-lockdown people, there are 2 historical currents on the American militia right. One is anti-government. The government is illegitimate. And it's an extreme version of the don't tread on me. Again, this is a spectrum across the right, and its extreme form is the anti-government militias. And mask wearing and you have to stay in your house goes right to their heart. These are the people who are most extreme also about gun rights. It goes just to, it's where they live. They believe to be, to put it in a nutshell, you asked me to wear a mask and it's the first step to becoming a slave. That's what they believe. The second current in the US of right-wing militia is white nationalism. The people on the streets for protesting George Floyd goes right to their heart, and they mobilize. So it's as though what failed in after Charlottesville had now awoken, and then they cohere into a single cause, and that cause is the third movement, which is the Trump campaign, and then which turns into first stop the steal and then the stolen election. And that turns out to be a successful banner to unite not only the both of the currents of the historic militia right, but also the populist right, the former Tea Partiers, the people who had been, voting for, the Newt Gingriches of the world since the 1990s. And as we have seen, Republican politicians in Washington and across the country.
Okay, what I would wonder is how come there was this shift from fearing, you talk about fearing Latinos coming across the border, but I would also include the Muslim thing, because that first campaign was as much about Muslims as it was about Latinos.
It was more an appendix.
All right.
But
in any case, but what you're saying is that those both, I assume you're saying both, got dropped in favor of anti-Black.
Yes.
Now, why? Yeah. Was he responding to what he read in public opinion, or was he leading that change and the cause of it? Which was it the chicken or the egg?
It's a very good question. The question is, how much is Trump an actor who is strategic, thought out, saying this, and I can make an impact, or is it that he is as a mentality of a piece with it? And I think it's the latter. I think that both in his business life before the presidency and in his politics, he's an improviser, and far more of an improviser than an ideologue or a strategician, someone who figures out strategy, strategist.
Yeah, simpler.
So I come down on his, for example, January 6th. January 6th was an occasion in which someone who is aspiring to be the head of the government, and here was the day in which it was to become official beyond all doubt. And he summons his followers in a kind of militia based formation. He summons them to the Capitol to take to the streets, to force the legislature to change, to act in a way to make him the head of state.
Okay,
hold on.
Let me just, I don't want to disagree with you, but I'm not sure how he did that summoning, because it could not have been all that explicit, or I would have seen it on CNN or someplace. It must have been through channels or something, because I didn't know that these guys were going to be assembling there. Apparently people in Washington did know, but didn't act on it. But I didn't hear about it.
Were you a follower of Donald Trump's Twitter?
No, of course not. But I certainly, it's like the kind of thing I would have been looking for, because certainly early on, after Charlottetown and well before his debates with Biden, I was thinking he's saying, well, he said explicitly, yes, I'll give up the presidency if unless it's known to be a fraudulent election. And of course, I've been thinking, well, that means you're going to say it's fraudulent. So yeah. I expected something.
He was saying that in 2016.
Yeah, that's right. And I expected that, but I didn't see any hint that that people were actually
No,
assembling.
it was explicit. Come to Washington.
Okay.
With the one famous tweet, come to Washington and be wild. He uses the
Yeah.
word
Okay.
wild.
Yeah.
You know, it was a constant. It was a constant and amplified, you know, in the way that Twitter amplifies things, that you know, individual groups retweet and plan on it.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think it is fair to say, accurate to say, that he summoned the people to the streets of
Then why
Washington.
didn't the press tell us? These guys are organizing, they're going to meet at such and such a place, and he's going to give a speech, and they're going to
Well,
go. But
you
and
know, it's
they didn't even beef up the security guards around
yeah,
the White House. In fact, they were, a lot of them had the day off. So somebody was not on the ball.
it's a good point. You know, you're asking me, why didn't it be more well known? And I'm the wrong person to ask that, because I follow these guys, and it was perfectly well known to me.
Mhm.
So there was no surprise about it. But I brought this up. I brought this up to make a point about whether he is improvising or strategic. The logic of what he did, summoning people, who's now going to be the head of state, who's going to be president. The logic of that is precisely the logic of the March on Rome. The March on Rome was how Mussolini came to power. It's a parliamentary system, so the head of the nation, who in Italy was the king at that time, he was going to face the question of who does he give the prime ministership to? And Mussolini flooded Rome with his militias, the squadristi, the black shirts.
Mhm.
The logic is precisely the same logic as Donald Trump and January 6th. There isn't a chance in the world that Donald Trump is aware of the March on Rome or understands it in any way. It's that in his improvisation and given his mindset, that he does reproduce the
Mhm.
kinds of logic you see, and you see in historical fascism and other right-wing movements, and which his followers, especially the most explicit proto-fascist, let us call them, followers, you know, they're blatant neo-Nazis who follow him and so forth and so forth. They recognize as you know, this is the way we operate. So, you know, that was an aside to kind of answer your question. Do I think he's planning this out? I think he lives in this kind of oh, excuse me for this, meta world where you know, those forms of logic kind of come natural to him. It's the way in which you know, you get a guy from Queens, New York, who makes sense to Southern Baptists.
Yeah,
How the hell did
okay.
that happen?
Yes, that there are so many incongruities.
Yeah,
Why the hell would they? I mean, here we go into, we may shift into the question of whether we're talking about class or status issues,
right. Yes.
culture or economics. And I think this is really important, but I don't know whether you're ready to talk about that yet. But the fact that the rebels choose as their leader what they think. In fact, he has to pretend to be richer than he is. He wants to be seen as the richest man in the world, practically, so that he'll be admired most by the people who should, if they were leftists, looking,
Right.
he would be the enemy. And that kind of incongruity, or what, I mean, you mentioned one in passing that I think I would sort of question when you say that it's their desire for freedom and so on, and rebellion against the government that made people want to not wear masks and to be opposed to lockdown. I don't see that, because there's no logic in that. There's no reason why right-wing people should be less afraid of viruses than anybody else, except what does make it more plausible to me is not the resentment of the government, but so much as the resentment of elites. That the resentment of scientists and the resentment of educated professionals who think they know, have knowledge that these people don't have. That seems to be a very important motivation. The resentment of people who, you think you're so damn smart and we are really smarter than you are.
Yes, and I talk about that at great length in the book.
Okay.
Who's smart, who's not smart.
Right.
Trump. I have a long quote in there of a 2016 rally in which he says, they think they're the elites. You're the real elites. You're the super. Okay, let's call them the elites. Then you're the super elites. It's here, the experience that you're talking about relative to elites is a feeling of being one down relative to the elites. Mm-hmm. The miracle, as it were, of mobilization of the populist right is a kind of, on a social psychological level, that flips. And they no longer, it's as though, what is the opposite in effect as a social psychological emotion? What is the opposite of contempt? Of resentment is contempt, exactly. And so there's this flip to having contempt, and that is at once kind of a social psychological thing, and let us call it the social psychological capacity to mobilize. You get mobilization when that flip happens.
You've given me a new angle, and I don't want to hijack your talk, but I'm tempted.
It's your show.
That's self-serving. But I'll tell you. Let's see if I can quickly say it. I was involved with the Survey Research Center work on anti-Semitism. Charles Block had that whole project. We had a whole bunch of books. One of them was a book that has my name on it, but it has nothing to do with what I actually wrote, because I did a reanalysis of the book on of the data on high school students, prejudice towards Jews and prejudice toward Blacks in 3 East Coast high school cities. Mm-hmm. And I found something that was, I think, very important, and it was not accepted, and was actually, I was sort of taken off the project. My name was on the book, but that the argument that I put together and found in the data didn't have anything to do with what was published. Mm-hmm. But what I found, and I actually wrote 2 different books, sort of. I wrote the first one, which didn't get published, on anti-Semitism in high mm-hmm. schools. And I wrote one on Black and prejudice toward Blacks in the US high schools. The one toward Blacks later was much more straightforward. This straightforward contempt, they are stupid, dirty, ugly, illegal, they are bad people, and we look down on them. It's just very, very clear. Attitude toward Jewish students in schools was all resentment, envy. they are higher status than we are. And now, what you said just a minute ago, I could prove this. Is all the data just absolutely flew off the computer page at me, but it was not anything anybody wanted to hear about. But at any rate, you just said that there's a flip from envy or resentment to sense of
Contempt.
superiority. And that I did not see and do not emotionally empathize with. I cannot quite see it in the attitude toward in anti-Semitism. I can easily see the resentment of all kinds of historic, even going back to Europe, resentment of Jews as being the chosen people, or any number of reasons to feel they were really the ones that God loved better than us, that kind of fear, not fear, but basis for feeling excluded. I don't see it as they're being displacing, say, Christians in Germany, or maybe it was a displacement thing, but it was more like historically they show that Jews are very superior, and we don't like that. Sorry to be so crunching these things together in such a simplistic way, but that's kind of the way I think it was perceived. Anyway, I didn't see it as a displacement, but as a recognition of a certain kind of status difference, maybe status in God's eyes, or who knows what. But definitely looking up to Jews and resenting Jews. That's what I think is very important in anti-Semitism, at least in those high schools that I was looking at. Now, it could be very different in other contexts. I don't know. I guess that's really what I want to say is resent. I see contempt toward Blacks and resentment or envy toward Jews as being the crucial element of anti-Semitism. Okay, is that?
Well, think about when historical anti-Semitism in Europe gets mobilized in its most powerful way. That, okay, these high achieving Jews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, who were objects of elite resentment, or resentment of them as elites, when it gets mobilized, which it gets mobilized under the Nazis, Jews are insects, they're vermin, and it goes on and on and on. In other words, there is the flip that
Okay.
Or if you think about, here's the thing that happened. The resentment in America on the right, and especially on the populist right, of liberalism, broadly speaking, blew America, and it's not simply the politicians and so forth. It's Hollywood, it's university professors, it's cafe latte, it's white wine, it goes on and on, down to consumption patterns and things like that. Historically, the resentment of the liberal elite had a kind of double layer, which was the liberal elite and what was perceived to be their client base, which is minorities and people and who Democratic politicians promise all sorts of goodies, and that's why Black people vote for them, and that sort of thing. So the resentment was of the liberal elite, but the liberal elite was understood as having as well this underclass, and that the resentment felt like a vice from below and from above. That had a funny change during the Obama years. suddenly the underclass was on top as well. You know, in the book, I quote a Tea Party ex-policeman saying, you know, the people I used to arrest and hunt down, investigate, they're now running things. So they're instead of a vice, it was as though they were now being crushed completely from above. And so there's variation in how these kinds of emotions play out and can be manipulated.
Okay. Okay, I think I diverted you from where you were going. I apologize, you know.
No,
Let's go back to where you were. Because I think at some point I'd like for us to talk about the distinction between cultural, that is to say, status differences, Weberian categories of identity, and class-based.
right.
Almost all of my friends and all of the pundits I tend to read in leftist-oriented publications insist that the real explanation for the shift toward right-wing nationalism in the US is somehow economic, that it's the Rust Belt people who lost their jobs to China. And now I spent a couple of weeks looking at the exit polls after the last election, the November election. And I did not find very much variation at all between, according to social class, that is, according to either income or even education, except at the upper levels. I saw something, there'd be like a 5 or most, not quite even a 10% differential between the poorest and people who earn up to 100,000 a year. The only noticeable jump in support for Biden occurred when you count people who contrast everybody else to those earning 100,000 or more a year, their income of that much. And there would be, 15 points or something like that. There'd be a noticeable jump, but there really wasn't much in income otherwise. And so it really, and the same with education. Everybody says it's really the uneducated who are supporting Trump. No, it wasn't. There wasn't enough differential to notice until you get to postgraduate level degrees, professional degrees. Anybody with some professional degree or a PhD, that kind of thing, then they were quite different. They were much more in favor of Trump. I mean, of Biden. So I think what's happening there, but the differentials, if you look at what really made a difference, of course, it was Black versus white. It was also rural versus urban, although the exit polls don't seem to collect data on urban versus rural. I don't know why they can't put that in there, but it doesn't show. So you have to get that evidence elsewhere. But the rural versus urban seemed to be a big difference. And then it was 90%, it was cultural things. It was abortion, it was gay marriage, it was can kids use transgender, can they use the washrooms of the other gender, guns, of course, all of these cultural things, they had huge differentials. So it seems to me that the difference between support for the right of the kind you're talking about, this current right wing, is really a cultural thing, having to do with being considered backwoods hicks
Yeah.
and not respected as eminent and respectable and the yeoman of of society, uh, and I think that what I read in your book, which I kept rereading because I liked it so much, was basically noting that this sense of resentment of elites being educated scientists and the IT people and the all of these folks who think they're so damn smart, like us. Yeah. Now I don't know if you're right, and I say we because I totally agree with you. I think, but if that's the case, what the hell do you do about it? I mean, a class analysis is easy. You give people more money, you even out the inequality financially, and you got it made. People should stop feeling so bad because you know they get what they're entitled to. But I don't know how to change disrespect when they say I, as an elite professor, or once was a professor, look down on these people. Well, they're kind of right. And what do I do about it? I mean, I know what my friend Arlie does. She goes out and hangs around with them, and she really likes them. I mean, she somehow manages to like them.
Yeah.
I can't do that. And when they accuse us of being snobs, well, what do you do about it? Because it's true.
Arlie, in a talk she gave about January 6th, she came up with one of these phrases that goes to the heart of things. And she said, she reported that her people in the world she has immersed herself in explained supporting Trump in spite of, there's also in spite of cultural things, the great conundrum of how is it that the people who used to call themselves the moral majority are now so thoroughly behind such a plainly immoral, thrice divorced, non-church going, so forth and so forth. That's the great conundrum of the Trump era in some sense. But Arlie reported that her respondent said about Trump, I felt that he saw me. And that's very strong, that he saw who I was. And I think that goes to the heart of why this is not fundamentally about the Rust Belt and the decline, the economic decline of the former white working class as it was during the heyday of things like the United Auto Workers. But how does that change? Nobody has a good answer to that. The current administration is, I think, attempting to right questions of inequality in a way that hasn't been done previously. Actually, as you say, giving people money. That's very different, and they're self-conscious about it. We're not going to do trickle down. We're going to do bottom up. We're going to give things directly. To some extent, I think that will peel away some of the kind of marginal support of Trumpism and the like, but it doesn't go to the heart of the resentment. When you talk about, what do I use a phrase in the book, that liberal America is understood as the people who think they know better and want to tell us how to run our lives.
But
And
it's true. We
you know, but
do.
yes,
And that's,
but
what do you do about that?
well, so for example, we talked about the lockdown movement. Um, I have taken to using the phrase populist epidemiology as a funny kind of ideology of that movement. Um, the capacity to create a counter world, it has reached a level that we have never seen before. So that Trump can get away with mainlining Clorox as a solution to COVID, and he doesn't lose any support. In fact, he gained support. It's another thing I argue in the book, that Teflon, the Reagan analogy, is mistaken. The Reagan analogy was, okay, this stuff floats off him. With Trump, it kind of clings to him like a junkyard creature who's magnetic, and all these things cling to him and make him stronger. So he can do those things, and it, liberal America, who keeps hoping that gaffes are going to get him, are looking at that backwards.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I wrote a piece about this in which I claim that what in psychoanalytic terms, there's this term counterphobic. That is, if you are afraid of something, the normal thing for most people is to not do it. For a counterphobic, he goes and does it at twice as hard and as if somehow that is going to manage it. So, everything that would shame anybody else, Trump will brag about. It's right. Like there is no shame in this man. He's counterphobic of everything shameful, or it should be embarrassing. But he will claim it. He will swagger. He will not deny that he rapes women practically, and so on. So I think what he does is, you use the term despite. The public will forgive him or will like him because despite the fact they disapprove of his morals. I think they love him precisely because he will claim all these things they don't dare do. I'm thinking back, okay, I was a child in Oklahoma, and I remember these little boys who were coming of age, puberty, and these little nasty little things that were going on, that, sexist, nasty, vulgarity kinds of mentality. And all of the other things, the guns, everything. I could see in these 12-year-old boys the thing that I see in Trump and his supporters, in their 70s and 80s. But, they can't get away with that anymore. The women's movement said, you can't do this to women. You can't talk that way, that you, etc. And so they can't publicly strut around, claiming to be rapists or something, but he can, and they can identify with him because he does. It's not despite his vulgarity. It's exactly right. Because his vulgarity, that's what attracts them, in my opinion. And it's because uniquely, it's a very hard thing to do, to pull off bragging about something that you really, that this is your real
that in polite company is verboten. Yeah. I
early in childhood, apparently, Courtney, Mary Trump's book, she wrote about his childhood and how he was brought up, and he was taught by this guy, Harry Emerson, I don't remember his name. The guy was a minister of his this church, Riverside Church or something in New York, and his family, oh, it's a wonderful story. His father was really, oh, I'm sorry, I can't think of the man's name. He was a very popular preacher who said, "You are great, you are beautiful. Don't ever don't apologize for anything. Never acknowledge that you were wrong. Always insist that you were right, and never back down." And he was taught that so well that, boy, he's lived that. So even if they catch him in the worst crimes,
Mhm.
he will strut around like he did right behind
Hillary.
Hillary, between, saying, yeah, okay, so maybe I haven't paid my taxes, you think. Well, that just shows how smart I am,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. That's
or the
classical counterphobia in psychoanalytic terms. And I think he's a best example of it I've ever seen, and the one that's the most successful at it. But okay.
okay. I am sympathetic to the place or the almost the need for psychoanalytic explanation of much of what goes on in the Trump world. I have given a lot of thought and reading a lot of psychoanalysis to try to come to terms with QAnon, which is, the question of conspiracy theory, which we hear about so much, has been there on the right for forever. And in the Obama years, the conspiracy theories directed on Obama were legion, from his birth to he's rounding up people to put them in concentration camps. He's having political, what do you call it? Military maneuvers in Texas are just a cover for rounding up people in Texas, and it went on and on and on and on. But the kinds of um, uh, conspiracy thinking that one now finds in QAnon, and the fact that it has become rampant, um, it seems to me demands a psychoanalytic understanding. I have discovered that for the first time maybe since I was in graduate school, I have been reading Carl Jung, and and he has this notion of what he calls the collective unconscious, which is kind of like this underground river, and it's an underground river full of ideas and images and symbols that are there, that he calls eternal. They're just there. And if you think about the similarity between the contention of QAnon, that the Democratic Party is full of child molesters who steal children and use their blood in rituals. Oh,
that's the Illuminati.
It's the protocols of
Illuminati.
There's version of that in the Illuminati. It stands out to me above all in the protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the thing that Jews often refer to as the blood libel. But it recurs. I would say that it's similar to the Salem witch trials. That some people are in league with the devil. You often find the word Satanist in QAnon. People are in league with the devil, and it is our mission to get rid of those people. And the continuity of that that's more striking to me about QAnon than almost anything else.
I agree. I've thought of it myself, that I refer to that frequently, but again, now, how is that connected with relating to fear of or antagonism toward elites?
Yeah,
I don't see the connection there. Why that?
Okay, here, you call it countertransference, and I'm sorry, counterphobic, and I was, that made a lot of sense to me as you were saying it. There's also this kind of projective quality that which you hate in yourself, you project onto the other. The other becomes a screen for
who even in his darkest collective unconscious would think that he has tendencies toward drinking children's blood. I mean,
I think that's a very good question, but a touch too literal. Basically, we have now QAnon has kind of has come to what is the worst thing, and let us project that. And I don't mean this as a self-conscious thing.
Okay.
Let us project the absolutely worst thing we can on these people. And that is, I mean, there's a kind of, American taken for granted reality that that in prisons, the people who are most looked down upon are child molesters. Whoops.
Sorry.
And so this is the occasion to say, what is the worst thing about people? And we're now at the point where we have to project the absolutely worst thing that we can think of onto these people. And it has taken hold.
Yeah, it sure has. Apparently, something like a quarter of in the US, a huge proportion of the American population believes it, which brings me back to the question I threw in at the beginning, which was only distracting, which is, how can you have a democracy when the voters have that kind of mentality? What do you do? We have to change people's heads. And you can't. How do you change people's heads? Well, you can't psychoanalyze everybody.
No.
The only thing I know to do is change the cultural forms that inform people, like TV shows. I'm going to start making soap operas. No kidding. I'm serious. I'm going to try to make them, because I think that if we make soap operas that straighten out people's culture, maybe.
Well, what you're talking about is education. Broadly understood.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. And the fear of the Republican establishment for at least since, George W. Bush, and it becomes explicit in 2008 and 2012, is their recognition of the demographic sword of Damocles that the Republican Party lives under, that the country is changing. And a subset of that is youth being tending liberal in a way, which is, I mean, if you have connection to 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds and so forth, their growing up in the USA has been very different than the growing up of people of our generation, in terms of, at least in cities, in terms of their integration with other than white people, which was I mean, overwhelming. And I grew up in a city with lots of minorities. Um, the ease and the presence of people of color and others in the media and so forth. And the right is intensely aware of youth being, you know, tending away from them. So there is this momentum which can, you know, voting suppression notwithstanding, um, uh, move the country politically in that direction. At the same time, it does require, as you put it, education in a broad cultural sense to be available in places where, you know, the dominant mode of cultural, you know, statement and sanctions and so forth are you know, the things like the Southern Baptist Convention it looks like it's going to split because there is an objection to the formal leadership talking about opening up to questions of race and things like the 1619 Project that this hardcore simply can't abide. You know, so you know, I'm sympathetic, but there's no easy answer to it.
That's right.
And the question of whether that kind of transformation, especially given what's going on with voter suppression, if that transformation of the electorate, let us say, actually will take place, as there does seem to be increasing numbers of Blacks and Latinos who voted for Trump, for example, and if it actually takes place, and whether, to use your phrase, democracy survives until such time as that cohort becomes established.
Well, that we have to leave it with the biggest question of all. So it's a dandy question, and we have to come back and talk another time. Our time is up, but it's been
Okay.
enormous fun. You know, I use the term lightly, fun, because I enjoy these conversations, but they certainly
Yes.
are not necessarily about pleasant topics. And it's been very, very interesting, fascinating to talk to you about
people. I run this center, and there's a lot of young people who are scholars in various places, and they ask me advice. And my advice is, when you deal with this material, you have to pace yourself. and yeah, fun. That's
Okay.
that's a famous way to pace yourself.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Larry. It's been